Welcome to today's webinar. Fraud starts in accounts payable. 5 steps to strengthen your first line of defense. My name is Mark Brousseau. I'm pleased to be one of your speakers for today's webinar. Today's webinar is brought to you by VendorInfo. For more information on VendorInfo, I invite you to visit them online at vendorinfo.com. I have just a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially get started. To ensure call quality, everyone's voice lines have been muted today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout today's webinar. To do so, simply use the questions tool on your screen to submit your question to me. In fact, let's try that out right now. I want you all to open up the questions tool on your screen. Go ahead, I'll wait. I want you to open it up and I want you to type in what it is your biggest concern about fraud in accounts payable today. What's your biggest concern about fraud in accounts payable today? Go ahead, type it in, hit that submit button, and send it to me. And finally, an on-demand recording of today's webinar will be made available to all of you within the next few business days. We encourage you to share it with your peers and your co-workers. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Phil Binkow, the Chief Executive Officer of VendorInfo. Hey, Phil, how are you today?
Hey, great, Mark. Thanks. And hello, everyone. It's great to be here.
So if it feels like your organization's risk of fraud is higher these days, well, you're not imagining things. 25% of all IOFM members say that concerns about fraud are their number one issue in accounts payable these days, topping things like pressure to do more with less and concerns about the economy and even managing the labor market. And that's no surprise. We know that the FBI, Interpol, states attorneys general, they're all sounding the alarm. They're saying that the way that we do things in accounts payable is leaving us at risk of falling victim to fraud. And while we might all think that we have policies and procedures in place, while we all are probably doing something to validate bank account change requests, the fact is that the way we're doing things is quite likely unwittingly leaving us vulnerable to fraud. And that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to go through the 4 stages of AP fraud prevention maturity and help you plot exactly where your organization is. We're going to share with you some of the risks in vendor onboarding and bank account change requests that we're seeing today and expose why it is that fraudsters are preying on some of our outdated policies and procedures. We're going to lay out controls and continuous monitoring approaches that can help mitigate your organization's risks, no matter how big or small you are. We're also going to show you how to build a proactive fraud prevention strategy. And Phil is going to give you a live demonstration of one solution you can use to mitigate your risks in vendor onboarding and bank account change requests, the VendorInfo. So let's start at the very top, where it is that most organizations are. Today, accounts payable has become ground zero for fraud. That's right. It's not IT anymore. It's not about hacking into systems. It's about tricking people into making changes that redirect payments in many cases to accounts that fraudsters control. You see, back in the day, organizations were dealing with an environment where it really was all about trust. We had paper invoices and telephone verification with local suppliers and pretty straightforward scams, many of which involved, well, paper checks. Well, today's fraud schemes are much more sophisticated, perpetrated by organizations that, quite frankly, are extremely well funded, in some cases by rogue Eastern European nations with HR departments and marketing departments to market their ill-gotten data. And one of the biggest vulnerabilities that we all face is our reliance on email and digital invoices. Today, it's not unusual to find organizations that receive 80 or 90% or maybe all of their invoices via email. And while email is certainly more convenient than the US Postal Service, the problem is that email, well, it just isn't secure. It provides no segregation of duty, no systematic workflows. There's no tracking of who does what in emails. There's no document retention cycles. And all that data that's floating around in emails is typically unencrypted. What's more, email opens the door wide to phishing attacks. The number one way that many organizations find that their emails become corrupted and business email compromise schemes begin. Add on to that the evolution of AI generated communications. Back in the day, we could be pretty sure who it was on the other side of a communication requesting us to make a change to a bank account. Well, today, it's not so easy. It all started, of course, with AI generated emails. They looked convincing. They oftentimes had the right contacts and even the right logos. But now fraudsters have upped their game. They're now using AI to generate texts that appear to come from coworkers or trusted suppliers. Now they're using AI to generate voice recordings. In some cases, you could pick up a phone call, think you're talking to an individual on the other side, and really it's AI. And now you've probably seen on the news cases where fraudsters are using AI to generate live images of individuals. You've probably seen that folks are recommending you ask the other individual to hold three fingers in front of their face. It's something that AI can't easily do. Well, this is what we're up against. And it really exposes the fact that fraudsters are using technologies that, well, we've been slow to adopt in accounts payable. Add on to this the fact that many cases, organizations, even small ones, are doing business with global suppliers. Now we have multiple languages and multiple currencies and multiple time zones, differing databases, or in some cases, no databases, and different standards that we have to manage. It makes it even harder to be able to validate information and all the time it takes for us to sort it all out. Well, that's time in which fraudsters can operate. And law enforcement officials tell us that the longer the time fraudsters have to move, the more likely they are to get away with their schemes. And as I said, these sophisticated impersonation attacks are only getting worse. So it's against this backdrop that organizations are taking a hard look at the way it is that they mitigate their organization's risk of falling victim to fraud. Bill and I think there's four stages of AP fraud prevention maturity that an organization typically goes through. That's what we're going to discuss here today. The first stage is reactive. The second stage is controlled. The third stage is standardized. And the fourth stage is proactive. Let's take a deeper dive into each one. The first stage of AP fraud prevention is what I'd call reactive. This is where most organizations start out and in some cases get stuck. In these types of environments, somebody's manually setting up new vendors and manually making changes to bank account details. In most cases, approvals across the organization and with the supplier are done via email. The organization is using spreadsheets to track all of the information that they're collecting on a supplier or changes that they're making to a supplier's information. This is typically being done outside the ERP, in many cases on somebody's local PC or laptop. In most cases, there's limited documentation associated with a vendor record. So it's hard to be able to tell what information was actually used to do any verification or validation, if of course anyone's done it all. Because in a reactive environment, there's typically what I'd call inconsistent verification. In most cases, anyone can set up a vendor in this kind of an environment. After all, there's probably not formal policies. And so, with inconsistent verification, somebody's going to have a different standard for themselves. Maybe they don't think it's their job. Maybe they're going to cut a corner. Maybe they're going to have a bad day. And of course, all throughout this process is the risk of somebody legitimately making a mistake, even a trusted employee. As companies grow and they become more mature, they typically move to a controlled environment. And this is where basic controls begin to emerge when it comes to vendor onboarding and vendor master data management. Now we've defined some onboarding policies and procedures. We probably formalized them in some sort of a document. Maybe it's available printed or electronically on a hard drive. We've typically have some sort of segregation of duties. So the same individual cannot set up a supplier and then make that initial payment. We typically have approval workflows, in many cases done with automation. Maybe it's a document management system, maybe it's a true AP automation solution. And there's oftentimes basic validation procedures for information that's collected from a supplier. So here we might be doing tin matching, we might be doing OFAC or sanction screening. Hopefully we're doing some bank account validation using an independent source, but not always. In many cases, it's via phone, potentially via email. In a controlled environment, we have improved documentation compared to that reactive environment so that now when things do go wrong, there's an ability to audit the process and see where we went off course. The challenge in this controlled environment, even though it's a big step forward from a reactive environment, is that, well, those controls remain largely manual. And so here again, we're largely dependent on the judgment and the commitment of our employees. So once organizations become more sophisticated, now they're going to start moving to what I'd call fraud resilience. And these are stages 3 and 4 in our fraud prevention maturity model. In stage 3, now we've really standardized our processes for onboarding suppliers and managing changes to vendor information. We have policies all across the organization. So no matter where somebody works, whether it's across town or across the world, we can be sure that they're using the same policies and procedures for onboarding a supplier and for making changes to their vendor data. And along with that, we're going to have consistent controls, typically outlined in a formal document that's adhered to. It's audited and folks are have accountability for doing the right thing. We also have centralized processes for looking in on things to make sure that they're being done correctly and standards for verifying all vendor information. And on the back end of a standardized environment, now we're more ready for audits. We don't have to dig through emails or, for goodness sake, through spreadsheets to try and figure out who did what and why. But the real goal should be what we call proactive environment. This is stage 4 in the AP fraud prevention maturity model. Now we've layered in continuous monitoring to automatically check in on what's being done when suppliers are being onboarded or vendor information is being changed. And in that monitoring are mechanisms for automatically alerting stakeholders when something doesn't look right. In a proactive environment, the solution also recognizes that not all changes to vendor information or to a vendor who's being onboarded are the same. And so technology will assign scores to any actions taken in this environment and then apply the correct workflows and policies and procedures. Similarly, the proactive environment uses what I'd call predictive prevention. So using AI and other tools, a proactive environment will automatically identify those suppliers or those circumstances that could introduce risk that somebody ought to take a closer look at. And because a proactive environment has automated many of the manual tasks in onboarding suppliers and making vendor information changes, well, now staff have more time to take a closer look at those anomalies or suspicious activities. All along the way in a proactive environment, you're going to have real time visibility, not near term, not next day, instantly be able to see exactly where things stand in the process. All of this, all of this gives organizations a whole lot of peace of mind. This is a far cry from where most of you, I dare say, are today when it comes to vendor onboarding and vendor information management. Today, we face a lot of vendor impersonation attacks. These typically start with vendors targeting an organization and this companies it does business with. So it might look at a mark and then go and research the companies that it does business with. It'll also do social engineering to understand exactly who it is within that organization and within their trading partners organizations who are involved in business to business commerce. Then then it targets them with emails, trying to trick them into providing some information that would let them hack into their email system. Once it's done that, now it is going to impersonate the supplier or a coworker who's acting on behalf of that supplier, maybe a CEO or other finance leader. And this is really, to me, the scariest part, right? Because it's not just what we do in AP that we have to worry about. It's we have to also be sure that our suppliers have got things buttoned down so they're not getting hacked and leaving themselves vulnerable and creating those phony invoices that end up, well, on our doorstep, because that's the next step in the vendor impersonation attack. Once the once the fraudster has infiltrated the email of our supplier or someone acting on behalf of our supplier, at some point they're going to submit a phony bank account change request. Now, many folks mistakenly believe that these change requests will come instantly after a supplier or coworker have been hacked, but that's actually not true. In many cases, these schemes evolve over the course of several months. See, what fraudsters will do is they'll test and in some cases try to win over credibility. So they'll send some innocuous emails asking for simple information, not something as important as a bank account change request. What they're trying to do is number one, make sure if they can go undetected, and number two, try to build up that credibility and trust. And once that happens, well, now they're going to go and swoop in and make that bank account change request. In many cases, it's going to have a sense of urgency attached. This is something that needs to happen. In some cases, fraudsters, because they've been lying in wait, they know exactly when your suppliers invoice you and when you make payments. And so they're going to time it just right. Law enforcement agencies also tell us that they've discovered fraudsters are sending phony bank account change requests at the end of the day. Well, why is that? You might ask. Well, that's the time we're tired. Our eyes are sore. Maybe we're got to rush out of the office to go pick up our kids at soccer. Maybe we're just worn out and want to clear our desks for the day. In other cases, they'll send these phony bank account change requests during the financial close. And here again, because they've been lying in wait, they know exactly when this is. And unfortunately, all it takes is for one missed validation, and that payment's going to be diverted. And we know from studies that only about 20% of all funds involved in business email compromise schemes are ever recovered. Because in many cases, as soon as that money hits the account, it's then whisked away to another faraway account where it's very hard to recover. And unfortunately, the way we do things during vendor onboarding and vendor information management really do leave us vulnerable to fraud. Of course, the riskiest thing we can do is verify supplier details and bank account change requests solely via email. We all know that email is not secure, and we don't know who's on the other side of those emails, even if they do seem to know us. So the fact is that it's easy for identity fraud to be taking place and for us to get tricked. We also know that manually managing vendor onboarding and changes to bank account details is really error prone. And it's those errors that can open the door to fraud, right? We miskey some information that throws off the validation, even in an automated environment. And now we've increased our risk. We also know that when we don't validate TIN matching as part of the vendor onboarding process, it's harder to be able to tell what matches up during that bank account ownership validation. And similarly, if we don't validate ownership of bank accounts with a third party, well, we're back to relying on trust rather than validation. And all of this leaves us in an environment where there's not a whole lot of documentation. And that's the kind of thing that auditors and now even governing bodies like NACHA, the ACH Association, are expecting when it comes to making payments to suppliers electronically. So Where do you currently stand when it comes to AP fraud prevention? I want you to think for a moment on these 5 questions. Does your organization have a formal onboarding process all across the organization, no matter where somebody resides or their role in the process? Do you automatically validate bank account ownership with an independent third party? And that's true whether it's domestic or international bank accounts. Do you maintain audit trails on all actions taken when it comes to onboarding suppliers and to making changes to bank account details? And do you have automated continuous monitoring in place for all changes made to a vendor account? I want you to think through these and be honest with yourself. And any one of these can be the thing that leaves your organization very vulnerable to fraud. So, if you think that maybe you're at risk based on that assessment, there are several steps you can take to make sure you strengthen your controls and mitigate your risks of falling victim to fraud. Fact is that the controls you put in place when it comes to vendor onboarding and vendor information management are your second line of defense. Of course, your AP staff are always going to be your first line of defense. But we can't rely on just our staff and we can't rely on just any one thing because today's sophisticated fraud prevention requires multiple layers. And that starts, of course, with segregation of duties. I'm always amazed when you see fraud schemes in the newspaper, how they went on for years and years, and the fraudster got away with millions and millions of dollars. And invariably, when you read down in the article, what you find is that the scheme was only uncovered when the person went on vacation or an extended leave or maybe even retired and somebody else was doing the job. What they discovered was is this one individual had the ability to set up these accounts and divert these payments without anybody ever knowing. But segregation of duties isn't enough. You also need approval hierarchy, and preferably it would be done with an automated solution. So whether it's onboarding suppliers, approving invoices, approving payments for release, or even making changes to bank account details, you want to make sure that you have approval hierarchies. Multiple people should be looking. Now, this is going to differ from organization to organization, but you probably want to have different rules if it's a new supplier or a strategic supplier or a high dollar invoice or a supplier whose bank account details have recently changed. Next, you want to make sure that you have change management controls that are adhered to every time, no matter what, and are formalized. Here again, automation can enforce these. No better example of why we need change management controls is the exceptions that we inevitably face all across the AP lifecycle. Today, exceptions represent more than a third of all our transactions in AP, and most of our day is spent dealing with those outliers, if you will. And so we've got to make sure that we have formalized rules for how it is exceptions are going to be handled. And this is where those approval hierarchies and change management controls really come in important. And finally, we must have standards for documenting every single thing that happens all across the vendor's life cycle. We need to make sure that we are able to, to go back and prove exactly what we did, to show our work, if you will. We can't just rely on emails and phone calls and hearsay. And so, what you want to do is you want to strive for a best in class environment. And this is where leading organizations really shine. They have automated workflows for approving supplier onboarding and invoices and payments, as well as changes to bank account details. They leverage tools like secure portals to collect information. So they're not coming in multiple entry points all across the organization and typically via email or maybe even PDF packets. Best in class organizations have continuous monitoring for every step of the vendor lifecycle. And they have real time alerts that notify senior leaders of anything that looks anomalous or, worse yet, suspicious. Continuous monitoring is really key to this process. What you want to do is you want to detect risks before payments are released. One of the most common questions I get from AP leaders is, well, Mark, how often should we be verifying and validating supplier information? And my argument is you should do it for every supplier at the time that you're making every payment. Now, for those of you in a manual or semi-automated environment, you might be like, My God, Mark, we don't have time for that." And that's really my point, is that the fraudsters have nothing better to do than try to rip us off. After all, that's their business. And our business in AP is to protect our organization's financial assets. It's not IT's job. It's not the CIO's job. It's AP's job. And so we want to make sure that we have mechanisms in place so we can be able to throw up a flag every time we're making a payment that doesn't look quite right. So we want to make sure that we're monitoring any changes made to supplier contact information. Who made this change and was it verified? We want to make sure that we're validating bank account change requests with an independent third party. And we're doing it for every single bank account change request, not just those that are part of the early warning system. We also want to make sure that we're constantly making checks to the OFAC database and for sanctions screening. Well, quick look at the news these days, and we could tell that the geopolitical environment is pretty fast changing. Are we at war? Or are we not at war? Well, the reality of all that for us in AP is that those companies that are on those lists are constantly changing. And in some cases, they might surprise you at some of the companies you can't be doing business with. We also need to make sure that there's not individuals associated with some of the companies we do business with who are also on those lists. Here again, in a manual environment, this is backbreaking work, but in an automated environment, well, it just becomes part of the process. And finally, we want to make sure continuous monitoring is looking for those suspicious behavior patterns. Wait a second. Why is the supplier changing their bank account details again? Hold it. We just set up this supplier. Why are they all of a sudden so fast changing their bank account details? This doesn't look quite right. This invoice, usually we get one invoice per month from this supplier. Why do we have 10? Or why is this invoice so much larger than the typical one? All of these are the types of things that AI and other tools can automatically detect using historical information. And so what we're looking to do is to move from an environment where we're periodically looking in on our AP activities, and we're doing it with real-time visibility. So we're using things like identity verification, making sure that supplier is who they say they are, that we're making sure that we're looking for risky changes to information and no changes to bank account ownership and any activity that could be indicative of potential fraud. So what we want to do is we want to move from a reactive environment to a proactive fraud environment. We want to put the fraudsters on their heels, not the other way around. And so there's some characteristics that you ought to look at implementing in your organization. You don't want to respond to fraud. You want to prevent it. You don't want to do manual reviews of suspicious activity. You want to have automated controls and then only look at those transactions that truly look anomalous or suspicious. You don't want to do a point in time check, say once a month or at the financial close. You want to continuously be monitoring transactions and ideally every single one before a payment is ever made. And you don't want limited visibility and certainly not the kind of visibility that you get from a spreadsheet. You want real-time instant visibility to everything that's going on. You want it all at your fingertips so you can show an auditor or the boss that you've got this all under control. And so to do this, here are 5 actions that I want you to take in the next 90 days. And the first is to assess your current maturity level. So go back and re-listen to this webinar. And I want you to take those different features of the different levels of the maturity models. And I want you to assess where you currently stand. Have a hard conversation with your frontline staff and maybe even some stakeholders in your organization. As part of that, I want you to review the way it is you go about onboarding suppliers and making changes to bank account details and other supplier information. This might be painful for many of you, particularly those of you that are still in a pretty manual environment that relies on things like callbacks. You might be surprised at just how risky things are, even if you have good policies and procedures in place. And then I want you to make a plan for strengthening your validation practices. This isn't just verifying a supplier is who they are, it's validating that the data that they've provided you is legit. So whether that's bank account details, PIN information, OFAC or sanction screening, you got to make sure every piece of information a supplier provides to you is validated. You want to have a tool that goes against all the databases that are publicly available to make sure this information is legit. And finally, I want you to implement mechanisms for continuously monitoring everything that happens in your AP department from this day forward. That's going to be hard. But in an automated environment, it's going to be much easier than you think. Because the reality is that today's fraud environment is more daunting than ever. You need to be able to identify gaps and exposure in your processes if you want the ability to prevent fraud and limit risks. The goal here is to detect those threats early, not after the fact when it's hard to stuff the genie back into the lamp. But don't take my word for any of this. Here now is Phil to show you a live presentation of one solution that can help you mitigate your organization's risk of falling victim to fraud. Phil?
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, everybody. I hope this has been helpful to you so far. Uh, VendorInfo provides frontline risk prevention, and what that means is it satisfies a critical set of very proactive activities that help you prevent fraud by confirming who your payments are going to before the payments are ever sent. And the way that it works is uh, your vendors can access uh, a portal. You can also do this as a back office, which I'll show you in a minute, where the vendors don't have to access your portal. But the portal would be configured to look like you. And the vendors come here, they receive an invitation, they log in, and they're able to fill out all the information that you need them to fill out in order to get them into your vendor master file cleanly and accurately. So their name, their address, uh, you can have them enter their banking information, both US banks and non-US banks as well. The system will validate every bank account in the world. You can have them put in their tax registration information, US or non US. For example, you can have them fill out a W 9, or you can also have them fill out a substitute W 9 on the form. You can have them fill out a W 8. And by the way, the system eliminates the need for your suppliers to try to figure out which W8 they're supposed to be using, because it has a wizard that actually pulls up the right W8 after a series of questions that that I just answered, and it guides them through the W8 so that they're filling it out completely. The system, unlike a W9, a W8 has to be renewed every 3 years. The system has a tickler file that allows you to have the system automatically send out an invitation upon your approval to those vendors whose W8s are expiring after 3 years. And by the way, it can also remind other vendors, maybe who you want to renew a certificate of insurance. It can keep track of all of those renewals automatically for you. Uh, you can collect all kinds of information. If you're looking for diversity information, the system will collect all of that as well. And these are options that are up to you. The system actually uses your forms and takes your forms and converts them into an online template that the vendors complete. And once they finish filling out their data sheets, they sign it and they submit it, and virtually immediately the validations are done. So, and the way that that looks is like this. You have a dashboard and a control center. You're able to see the status of every vendor's submissions, where they are in the process. This is an example of uh, verifications that are being done for taxpayer ID, for sanctions lists, for addresses. Everything is color coded in green, yellow, or red, depending on whether it's a match with the appropriate information from a source of truth, or whether there's a problem. Uh, for example, if there was a problem with a tin, like there is for this example you're going to see now, it shows up in red right here, and then the tin shows up in red. And you're able to, from the system itself, you're able to actually get back to the supplier and tell them to fill out the correct information. And all the while, the system is keeping track of everything that that is performed, who did it, what they did, and when they did it. So it's really completely audit ready. For bank account validations, it's similar. So here is an example. This is one of our accounts. There's a 9-point check. It shows that the routing number and the account number actually match what the bank has on file, and it's an open account. But it also matches the name and the address and the city on the account, and the state, the zip code, the TIN, with what the bank has on file, and it's a perfect match. It also has a Google map of the facility and a picture where it's available, so you can see exactly where this vendor is based on the address that they submitted. If there was a discrepancy on the account, like there is here with Crazy Jim's Pizza, then those would be color coded as well. And this is an example, but what we can see is that this is a valid account and it's open, but the company is different than what the bank has on file. It's an alert. The address is a little different. The zip code is different. So is the TIN. And alerts mean that it's a partial match, but not a complete match. And the city and state are not matches at all, which is why they come up as a warning. Uh, Different databases do not usually contain all of the banking accounts in a particular country. So we have other means and other procedures that the system will go through automatically for you in order to validate any bank account anywhere in the world, whether it's in a database or whether it's not in a database. Whoops. Once your folks review this information, and by the way, they can review it based on your rules for review and workflow. Some folks have very complicated review and workflow scenarios where there's multiple business entities, multiple divisions, multiple product lines. Doesn't really matter. The workflow, review and approval workflow, is built to accommodate any customer's business rules. Once they are validated, then the first person who's looking at it and approving it would click in the approval box and approve it, and then it would go to the next person and the next person in line, based on the criteria that you have internally for your controls. Once that's done, Then the system can upload this automatically for entry into your ERP system. Uh, and it's ERP agnostic. Uh, we haven't found an ERP system where this would not inter, excuse me, where this data could not be uploaded effectively. This is the vendor facing option, but you can do the same thing back office. So if you wanted to validate a TIN or I'm sorry, validate a TIN, the TIN information would be entered and submitted. The same thing is true with bank account information. It would be entered and submitted as well. And then the results, once that's done, which is instantaneous, would come back and you'd still see it on your dashboard. And you'd be able to take the appropriate action, either get more information uh, if it's not correct, or have it go through the approval process and ultimately be exported for upload into your ERP system. I know that's a high level overview. More than happy to more than happy to uh, follow up with you if you'd like a little more granular information about it. Just let me know. Mark's going to put up on the screen our contact information and how you can get in touch with us. Mark, do we have time for a few questions right now?
You indeed, if you haven't already submitted a question for Phil, or if you've thought of another question for Phil, go ahead, use that Q&A tool to submit your question to me now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Our first question up is from Maria. Maria wants to know whether the platform supports multiple languages.
Hey Maria, thanks for joining us today. Yes, it does. It can do any language, uh, anywhere. Change the forms into those different languages for sure.
Thomas wants to know whether it can support Canadian bank accounts.
It does. In fact, it's interesting because while Canada doesn't have a database, there are pockets of automated verification in Canada, but the system doesn't rely solely on databases to do the verifications, and any bank account in Canada can in fact be verified.
Susan is wondering how long it takes to get a response to a bank account inquiry.
Sure. So for the accounts that are in databases, which is most of the accounts, but not all. Uh, it's instantaneous. And for those that are not in a database, it gets verified as soon as the vendor takes an action that we instruct them on, and we can go through the methodology for that with you in a brief demo.
Jeff wants to know how big an organization needs to be in order to cost justify this solution.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Glad you're here. It's a wide range. I mean, our customers are all over. We have customers that are multi billion dollar companies, but then we also have customers who are smaller nonprofits. Less than $100 million a year in revenue. In some cases, significantly less. It depends. It really depends on what you're doing today, what your volumes are, and how much time you're spending on it. Our folks can walk you through it. Happy to set up a call with you, with myself and one of our product engineers, and they can talk with you and see if this is something that would be uh, would be beneficial for your operations.
Well, I understand we have a special guide that we're making available to our attendees today.
We do indeed, and let me just share this with you all real quick. Mark, can I share my screen?
You can indeed, yeah.
Okay, great.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm pushing the wrong button.
Oh,
Here we go.
there
Thanks.
you go.
So the CFO's guide to vendor data risk is really a comprehensive overview. It summarizes and many of the things you saw today, goes into a little more depth in some of the areas, happy to send that to you. It's an ebook. Mark, let me quit sharing my screen. If you could, anybody who wants it, just go ahead and contact me at the address that Mark's going to put up here. Give me a call or just shoot me an email directly, and happy to get that out to you.
Perfect. And that will be our final word. Phil, thank you so much for an excellent presentation today and sharing your insights with us. And thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day. If you'd like any more information on the topics we talked about today, or if you'd like a free copy of that guide, go ahead and email Phil at the email address now displayed on your screen. On behalf of Phil and VendorInfo, this is Mark Brousseau. Thanks so much, everyone. Hope to speak with you all again soon.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.